Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Anarita Bashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine and many other countries. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and Marshall IT for making this weekly event possible. Please feel free to use the chat to post any questions to our guest. And now we have Katerina Shrey would like to greet you and especially viewers in Ukraine.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми сердечно вдячні за вашу силу і дякуємо вам за вашу участь в нашій програмі.
Thank you. And now I would like to greet our viewers from the former Soviet Union. Добро пожаловать на нашу дискуссию. Пожалуйста, присоединяйтесь к нашим дискуссиям по пятницам. Мы будем рады, если вы пришлете нам ваши пожелания, замечания и любые вопросы. And today, guests will be introduced by the Dr. Victor Fett. And please turn off your mics and video cameras. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victor Fett of Marshall University in West Virginia. And as usual, since March, we start our weekly Friday panel discussion on M-Ukraine group. M-Ukraine is a grassroots group of faculty which started information on Ukraine with interviewing people in Ukraine, people who are experts in the US and elsewhere, people who fled Ukraine, people who fled Russia. There is enormous turmoil in the world for the last 6 months, and no one knows where it goes, but we all know and believe here that the only end to it can be put by military victory of Ukraine on the battlefield over the invaders. And this will obviously reformat and already is reformatting the world we live in. In this sense, it may not be called yet a world war, but it definitely is, and it involves everyone on this planet. Today, I welcome our speakers, and the second speaker is going to join us later. The first speaker is Dr. Alexey Oskolski, with whom we share a lot of common background, although we never met personally. He is a scientist, biologist from St. Petersburg, who moved to South Africa after approximately a year after the war in Ukraine started in 2014, because that's where the war started, by Russian invasion and annexation of Crimea and the initiation of war in Donbass, as everyone knows. Dr. Oskolski was introduced to me by my friends. In fact, I need to make a notion that I'm a biologist by trade, and a lot of my friends brought interesting speakers and remarkably vocal and dedicated to this program. And maybe they're not less knowledgeable than experts in history and political science. And we noted that those who are used to observe and characterize behavior of animals or distribution of trees can speak quite well about what is happening with humans too, because they are observable, vocal, and can tell us in plain English what is going on in their own opinion. We are interested in personal stories and experiences and eyewitness stories. So with this, I introduce Alexey Oskolski, who is now in Johannesburg maybe, Joburg, most likely. And he, as I said, is from St. Petersburg. I don't need to tell our learned guests that St. Petersburg used to be capital of Russian Empire until approximately 100 years ago, and still remained until recently the cultural and research center of the erstwhile empire. formerly also known as the Soviet Union. Alexey stems from Botanical Institute of the Academy of Sciences. I did my PhD just next to it in Zoological Institute, the former institution started by Peter the Great of the Poltava fame, for those familiar with Ukrainian territory. But I pass gladly to Alexey microphone for his introduction, and then I'm sure we will have a few questions, because he will be talking, as I asked him, mostly about Russian expats, those intellectuals and other educated and less educated people who left Russia in last few years, especially this year. The flow of people, the drain of brain from Russia now exceeded by rate that which happened after Russian Communist Revolution in 1917. So for those who still think this is not the world-changing event, please watch the news. Thank you, and I will give microphone to Alexey now, please.
So Victor, thank you very much for your invitation. And I will, thinking about this, my speech, I think I will tell you, I'll share with my story of immigration to South Africa, and not personal story, but my motivations to migrate to South Africa. So why it can be interesting? So actually, this war, this catastrophe, of course, invasion to Ukraine was a shock for me, and it was ethical and existential shock, but it was not surprised for me, and I predicted it quite long ago, and this is one of my motivation. I understood that Russia had no perspective, and but of course I didn't expect it that this catastrophe will go in such a stupid way, as we can see. But anyway, but what I can say that I worked in St. Petersburg as botanist, and I wanted to leave Russia quite long ago because I understood it. I felt and I understood that Russia, it is former empire. This state and it tried to be an empire, but fortunately or unfortunately, it was evident for me that Russia, post-communist Russia, post-Soviet Russia, had no any positive imperial mission, because for each empire, each successful empire, provide some positive senses, some positive ideas in the world. And even if these ideas not very sympathetic for me, but this is the fact. And in Soviet Union, such idea was idea of communism. Of course, the people, many people disappointed, but Soviet Union was quite a successful empire. But after the collapse of Soviet Union, the Russian state, Russian empire, lost any positive sense, and this is the understanding of this conflict between empire infrastructure of the state and the loss of any positive mission is one of basic motivation for me to leave Russia, because this state cannot be exist long time. It was especially important actually for me because my younger daughter was born in 2009. So, and I thought about her perspective in Russia. But The second motivation for me, very important, the trigger of my living, was so-called the law of Dima Yakovlev. This is the law was, sorry, Виктор, как сказать, закон принят парламентом? Victor?
Passed by the parliament.
Yes, passed by this law was passed by Russian parliament in 2012, and it was this law banned the adoption of Russian orphans by American citizens. It was in the reaction for some problems between Russian corruptioners and American businessmen. But it is not related to any this law is not related to problems of orphans, to problems of children. And for me, it was first shock, because I suppose it this law, it is just for very was passed just for very for the political conjecture, for a political situation which is not related to problems with children. And in fact, it's a biopolitical law, similar with Nazis' Nuremberg's law. So for me, I cannot, I suppose that the state, the government must not regulate adoption of orphans. In the same way, must not regulate the marriage. The people can marry with citizens of any country, of any race, and so on. And the same situation is here. It is this law very similar with Nazis' law. But after this law, I started to search for the job opportunities, and I considered the South Africa and Brazil. But in South Africa, I found the permanent position. That's why I moved here. But I cannot say that I moved due to annexion of Crimea in 2014. But during this story that when the Russia annexed the Crimea Peninsula from Ukraine, so that I survived. I had several cultural shocks. Of course, I discussed the situation with my colleagues, with many people in Russia, and many people in Russia were very enthusiastic about this event, this annexion of Crimea. Fortunately, now there is not such enthusiasm here in Russia. So, but I asked these people who supported this annexion, why it is such interesting for you? Can you please explain me personally why it is personally for you such important? And I saw very interesting thing. Nobody can explain me in normal personal way. If I ask them to answer, the answer was the stereotypic phrases of the propaganda. Nobody was able to explain it from first person, from explain their own personal meaning. But the most common answer was that why do you ask it? It means that you don't like Russia. This is the only argument from the personal argument. But observing this talking with these people, I understood that these people who are the power, the Putin's power was sorry. They the Putin's power, they who are supporters of Putin's regime, they don't have the rationalistic subject. It is not possible for them to communicate with the in rationalistic way.
Dr. Oskolski, you've been muted accidentally.
We lost your sound.
I can hear you. Alexey, ваш микрофон не слышен. Unmute yourself, please. Alexey, your microphone is not on. Unmute yourself. Microphone. We don't have sound.
Now,
okay. Now it's fine.
Sorry, must I repeat or what?
Repeat, please, the last couple of sentences.
Just last.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so for me was shocked that many people, many my colleagues and my friends, quite well-educated persons, they for them there is no problem in contradictions between words, thinkings, and facts. When we are discussing about the occupation of Crimea. So, and I see that it is quite difficult anthropologically. It was my anthropological discovery, personally, for me. It was shock that I know these people as very good researchers. They are well-educated people, but they are not able to argue their position, and they don't see any problem with this. So, and for me, it was quite an important reason to leave to leave Russia, and for them, their personality and their conscience is replaced by the figure of chief, of leader, of Führer, of course, Putin's. And so for me, it was a real shock. After that, so I can say that I emigrated from Russia not only because the loss of perspective. Of course, there are some positive sense. South Africa is the country which are extremely interesting for me as a botanist. It has absolutely unique flora, and this flora is very poorly explored from point of view of structural botanists. I am the only plant anatomist now in South Africa, and it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity for me as a scientist. It's a positive sense. And so, but this is just my person. This is not related to the current war in the Ukraine. So, and so for me, it was just anthropological shock for me. And after that, after this experience in the which was 8 years ago, I don't. There is no wonder what happened now. So I did not expect only that this catastrophe happened in such a stupid way, because this war is stupid from any point of view, even from position of the Russian state. Okay, so I will stop now, and perhaps you have some questions, and we can discuss something. And I'm sorry. So I can speak in English about my scientific matters, but I have no experience to discuss such kind of matters in English.
I'm sure everyone understood you perfectly. Believe me, maybe perhaps the word perhaps was not understood because we say perhaps or maybe. But we thank you, and I'm sure people have questions. Thank you for a passionate presentation, especially since we really share a lot of personal background, although we never met personally. I open it for questions from the panel and the viewers. Please, you can put your questions in chat box. We will read them, or we will translate them if you can put them in English. Thank you. Who will be the first to ask question, please?
Well, happily,
Katerina,
thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Oskolski, for your presentation, and your English is just fine. I'm wondering when the previous generation, my parents are part of the generation that left previously, and when they came to, in my case, Philadelphia in the United States, but other parts of the world as well, those groups of immigrants established communities, and it's very strong diaspora. Is there anything like that happening in South Africa? Do you have a community is there a Russian-speaking community in South Africa, or are you pretty much isolated?
No, in South Africa there is a Russian-speaking community, but I'm not. I have we have several friends, but we are not a part of this community. And what about the Russian community? So one of the first our reactions on the war, my wife organized the meeting in the center of Johannesburg. Russians stand with Ukraine. We wanted to show that Russians, at least some Russians, don't support this war. And it was the international meeting, because the several Russians came. It was not many people. It was very spontaneous, and we had no experience to organize such actions at all. But it was about 20-25 persons. And there were people, the Russians, Lithuanian, Ukrainians, and some local. The husband of this Lithuanian lady, and but it was quite successful, successful action. But as far as I know, most Russians support in South Africa supporting this war.
Thank you. I have a second question, if I may. You mentioned your daughter was born in 2012. What do you hope for her? What do you hope for her and for the next generation? What would you like? What do you hope is the outcome of this terrible situation, so that your daughter can live in peace? Like, what do you hope for the next generation?
What do you? Sorry for.
Hope. В чем надежда ваша?
For.
Для следующих поколений.
And I apologize. That's an extremely personal question. I apologize for that. That's
if we, there is a just general observation which is not related to this war. So there are quite maybe the now the children, the teenagers now. This is the first generation which have no conflict between parents and children. So, and at least I read such ideas recently, and I see it looks, and maybe this is quite important reason for my hope. But if we are discussing about the in political context, I hope that Russia, Russian Empire will be collapsed. I don't want so the many problems. The Russian imperialism having no positive sense, positive mission, makes many problems to many people, and I hope that that Ukraine will win and for its victory, and the Russia will be transformed in a normal country, or maybe in many normal countries. Of course, it's extremely difficult task, but we are in the situation which have no good solutions. Any solutions is difficult, but at least this the collapse of Russia, it can be it gives the hope for normal development, for perspectives of the people, for the population on this territory.
I apologize for the personal nature of the. I'm a mother too. I have 4 children the same age as yours, as your daughter, and so I'm constantly thinking about what does this mean for them and for their generation. Thank you for answering my question, and I apologize for the personal nature of that.
No, why not? Why not? It's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. I'm opening microphone. Anara, you want to
Yes,
ask
I have a
Yes,
question. That's a little bit more general. What do you think about mass migration of scholars from Russia? And if you would like, you can bring stories of your colleagues who actually also had to actually leave. And could you compare this process to the migration that happened after the Bolshevik Revolution?
Oh, that's there are many questions actually. So what I can say that the migration of of researchers from Russia, maybe it is. Sorry, do you mean the migration now? It's triggered by this war, or do you mean the migration during last decade, or what?
Yeah, it's actually that. Thank you very much for clarification. I think it's both, because Russia moved to this war gradually, and some scholars left earlier. That's why. But finally, the war was actually the final point. You know, the point that actually triggered this.
So, but what I can say, so during last decade, about 10, 15 years, the situation for researcher in Russia was essentially improved. In Russia, before it was very difficult to do research. Now, so in last year, it was quite. Of course, there were many problems in Russia, but actually there are no serious migration of scientists from Russia. Of course, quite many people left from Russia, like me. But I don't. I know quite many people who came back. But now the war. So, and of course, in Russia, there are many problems with organization of science, but I think it's not good place to discuss it. But so now, quite many researchers left from Russia after the February, 24th of February. They try to get any opportunities to leave. So, and it's quite difficult to say. I understand. Of course, I understand my colleagues very well, because maybe the Russian scientists, very few my colleagues in Russia support this war. And in the first day of the war, in 24th of February, I took part in organization of public open letter of Russian scientists against this war. And this letter was signed by about 8,000 academics, researchers, and scientific journalists, not only in Russia, but essential part of these people are in Russia. I think not less than 70%. And it was a real risk for people who living in Russia. And now there are many of these people had their problems with FSB. They've got the fines, quite essentials, about $500, but they have real risk to be jailed. But nevertheless, at least so that at least 6,000 people, scientists living in Russia, signed this open letter. And it shows that the majority of Russian scientists are against this war. And of course, in this situation, for them, it's very difficult to stay there, to live in the country, making such a terrible crime. And but I suppose that it would be great if the Western countries, but not only Western, different countries can support this migration of Russian scientists. It is the way to get strong experts to improve the intellectual atmosphere in these countries, and this is the way to make the Putin's regime weaker. It can be against this regime because the intellectuals can they have no in Russia they have no choice. They will work for the state, for the making this this war. So sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oskolski. I think we have time for one, maybe more question, and then we'll move to second speaker. Do you have a question? Any in chat? Maybe. Well, I have a question here in chat from the guest. How the colleagues, other intellectuals in South Africa, are reacting to the war against Ukraine, though the South African intellectuals. Do you have any idea?
It's an interesting question. So that's all my colleagues supported me, and of course that's in the first days I talked with my colleagues and with my students. I explained my position, and all the people said yes, of course, we agree with you. You're right. But I know that the Putin is quite popular person in South Africa, and because the Putin is considered as the antagonist of United States, and as you understand that anti-American ideas and anti-Americanism is also present in many countries. So, and the Putin is considered as the antagonist of the United States. For the South African, that's Ukraine and Russia is this is quite far. Many people didn't know where is the Ukraine? What is this? What's the problem? So that's why I cannot say. And some people said me about. I didn't meet the supporters of this war in South Africa, but I know they exist.
Thank you, Dr. Oskolski. This is a huge theme which we most likely will hear emerging again and again, because we are asking the same questions from people in different countries in different languages. These wars, none of the wars before really cuts across the entire humankind right now. And we hope that this attention at least will not fade. Thank you, and you're welcome to stay with us for the second half of the broadcast.
Thank you very much.
Good luck to you from me and my friends. Thank you.
Thank you. I will stay.
Thank you. Please stay. And you can turn off your camera to not to distract others. And I remind our guests also, please, unless you want to talk, do not turn on your camera, because this distracts the recording and viewing. I would now move to our second speaker, and I will call him to turn on his camera. Sergey, please turn on your camera. If we can.
Wait a moment.
Yes. A second speaker today joins us from Kiev. They just had an air raid, but I hope the talk, which has been preparing for a while, will not be interrupted. Serhiy Kamyshan, whom I know almost 50 years, was my schoolmate in the blessed time in the Soviet Union's famous Novosibirsk University in Western Siberia from 1973 to 75. And we did a lot of interesting things together. Serhiy, your camera is not on. Please try to activate it. I know it worked before. And Serhiy is the chemistry researcher. He is in Kiev for a number of years now. Hello, we see you. We see you and we hear you, I hope. Yes?
Maybe.
Yes, okay, we hear you, making sounds. Serhiy is has prepared an interesting personal story for us. And without further ado, only thing I need to tell about him that he is a chemical researcher, that he actually is not retired. He is working in the research institution of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences in chemistry. And he will mention this also in his talk, how they actually go about it right now in the wartime. But also he is an amateur historian of Ukrainians in Siberia. And I hope we will have a separate podcast about this, because the way you get to Siberia were many during Russian Empire and Soviet Union. And this is still a rather exotic place, which we know a lot about. But today, Serhiy will be doing a little introduction of what is going on, what was going on from personal perspective, and then tell us with a few images about his native town of Trostianets in Ukraine, in Sumy region, which has been in spring after the occupation of Russian invaders. And we will, I hope everyone will stay to see the pictures and listen about unknown to us. Absolutely, I didn't know anything about Trostianets, but it personifies the depths of Ukrainian history and the richness of Ukrainian present, and the tragedy of what is going on. Thank you, and I give microphone to Serhiy for his introduction first, please.
May I begin? Good evening, everybody. Well, it's evening in Kiev, but I think that the greater part of audience has afternoon, and someone maybe in California even morning, but it is evening behind my window pane. So I, as we here say, Доброго вечора, ми з України. That is, good evening, we are from Ukraine. First of all, it is a great pleasure to express my deep gratitude to my old friend, Professor Victor Fett, for his kind invitation to this here panel. I am also thankful to the honorable audience who spared their time for me. Secondly, I am sorry for my English that is not fluent enough. It turns out so that I hadn't practiced in English for a very long time, so I'm disqualified, so to say. I ask Victor to correct me if my mistakes are unpardonable. So let's begin. I see only Victor on my screen. Is it all right?
Yes.
We turn cameras so we will not distract everyone.
And other people see me?
Everyone sees you and will see your pictures, which
Okay.
I will show when you tell me. Yes, we are fine. Go on.
Thank you. So I begin. My impressions of the current war are rather scarce. The district of Kiev where I live is relatively quiet. Just like my namesake, Professor Sergei Kurbatov, who appeared on this panel 3 weeks ago, I was awakened early in the morning, 24th of February, by the sound of explosion. I turned on the radio and learned that Putin started the war against Ukraine. Then I finally realized that there will be no hospital for me now. February 24 was the day when I was scheduled to go to the hospital due to some cardiovascular problems. Indeed, soon an announcement came that all the hospitals admit only wounded patients and those who need urgent surgery. I don't know. All the planned surgical operations and medical checkups were postponed. Soon it became clear that this first explosion I heard was not far from my place. A wreckage of a Russian cruise missile fell on the roof of a 2-story building half a mile from my house. The fire was soon quenched and destruction was minor. Later, the closest damaged buildings were at least 3 or 5 miles from me, so I consider myself lucky. As I say, my district is relatively quiet. However, absence of explosions doesn't mean complete silence, especially at night. Shots of anti-aircraft guns were heard every now and then. Very soon they stopped to frighten us. In fact, if you hear the sound of shot, then the shell will not hit you. If it hits, you hear nothing. Nothing at all. And with a high probability forever. Although there was one accident here that one may call dreadful. Our apartment block, where I sit now, is situated on the route of planes that take off from the Kiev city airport or make landing there. As a result, now and then we hear the noise of aircraft engines above our heads. When the war began, the commercial flights were cancelled, and we heard this noise no more. But once at night, I heard some noise above and was astonished for a moment. Could it be that I began flying again? The next moment I realized that the sound was not that of a plane or a jet. It was high, piercing, and fell, just like the voices of the wind Nazgul from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. For long decades, we lived far from combats and battles, so the only association with such sounds comes to me from fantasy books. The sound was very unpleasant, hard to endure, but immediately 2 or 3 shots of anti-aircraft guns were heard. In this case, they were anti-missile ones. And as I told before, I calmed down and went to sleep. But not everyone in our house calmed down. A neighbor of mine, an elderly man who has severe problems with his legs, he walks only using 2 crutches, told me much later that his daughter was so scared by this missile, which appeared to be brought down, that she insisted on immediate evacuation to the western part of the country. You see, my neighbor told me, I hardly can walk, but I don't get tired when driving, so I drove for 7 hours. He evacuated his family to Kamenets-Podilsky, a city 440 kilometers to the southeast of Kiev. They stayed there for 5 or 6 maybe weeks, and then came back. Another my elderly neighbor, a Pontic Greek, was visiting Greece a couple of years ago and got stuck there because of COVID quarantine. He wished very much to return to Kiev, had numerous problems. He was short of money in Greece because he didn't plan to stay there for so long. In Kiev, his electricity and phone were turned off because he had no way to pay bills. At last he managed to come here together with his ill spouse. Alas, in a week or 2, the war began, and they had to go back to Greece to his very, very distant relatives. I heard also about a lady from our apartment block who flew to Estonia, of other persons who chose to evacuate, but in general I can say our corner of Kiev is rather calm and silent. On the other hand, the research institute where I work is not far from the field of the battles that took place in February and March. It is located half an hour by bus from sadly known Bucha. But in that time I didn't go to work. Almost none of my colleagues did. Moreover, if I tried to visit my institute, I wouldn't succeed. There was no public transportation. In peaceful time, I spent almost an hour in the subway to get there. Naturally, to walk all this way would take several hours or maybe all day. Those who lived not far from the institute learned all the horror of missile and artillery attacks, but I can only retell what they told to me. My colleague, a woman of 50 or so, lives 2 miles from the institute. Their part of the city was under heavy Russian fire, but that was not the worst for her. Her mother got a stroke. She could not walk or even get up from her bed. So they brought her to the bomb shelter in the basement of their 16-story house and lived there, all the family, for several weeks before the armed forces of Ukraine drove away the Russians from the Kiev region. Twice or thrice a day, she or her husband or their daughter came away to buy some food or drugs and check up what goes on in their empty flat. My workmate, another workmate, who lives rather far from the institute, but also in the northern part of the city, another side of the Dnieper River. For 3 weeks slept in the corridor or in the bathing room or in the basement with her children and husband, because these parts of house are the strongest when a shell or missile hits the building and there is a chance to stay in one piece. Such an easy sleep made her extremely nervous, so she made a decision to evacuate to the west of the country. She spent 2 months in Skolomia, a small historical city in Ivano-Frankivsk region, worked online, although partly without pay, recovered her health and her nerves, let her children finish their school year, picked up a homeless kitten, and received a grant to do research in Spain for half a year. One should say the situation turned out to be positive for her. Well done, Tatiana. Meanwhile, when she was still in Kiev and bombing of the northern part went on, although it became much less intensive, when the director of our research institute, who has an extremely stern notion of discipline, summoned the heads of departments and labs and demanded that all the researchers must return to their workplace. I don't know how all these people got there. The public transport was very poor. Maybe some had their own cars. This is not common among scientists in Ukraine. Others hired taxis. Anyhow, they came, heard the director's demands, and began raising objections. The main point was that employees merely couldn't reach the institute in reasonable time. Subway trains didn't cover the whole route, but stopped and turned back far from the terminal station, so people should walk 5 stations. Nonetheless, no objections were taken into account by the director, and the discussion went on. Our director's stupid concentration on the attendance rather than work outcome was wide known before, but in the wartime it looked tragicomical. So the discussion flared up until the sound of powerful explosion was heard. Power went out in the entire institute building. The light was gone. Immediately an artillery cannonade began, and everyone, with the director ahead of the crowd, ran skipping out of the building in complete darkness. The issue of attendance was resolved automatically, and no one was injured. The person whose situation and whole his life worried me most of all went to her parents who live in Bila Tserkva, a small city 50 miles south of Kiev. But even there, Russians bombed an oil terminal not far from their home. No victims, but another source of fear. Another girl, a graduate student who works next door to our lab, chose to flee to the countryside. This appeared to be an unhappy choice. She spent several weeks in a village near Borodyanka. The town of Borodyanka underwent severe air bombardment. The village nearby remained intact, but was occupied by Russian troops. And she, this girl, saw mass executions of civilians. Anyone who lived in Kiev during these months can tell a couple or two of such stories, dreadful or facetious, dreary or fabulous, but mainly sad. So I don't think that retelling them here by me will be of great value. My narrative about Bucha, Borodyanka, Mariupol would be even less valuable, because I was not a witness. You may find information about these places of Russian crimes in hundreds of sources. However, there's a place about which I can tell something interesting, I hope. I was not a direct witness of recent events there, also, but I know the place very well. And moreover, my 83 years old aunt, who told me a lot, still lives there, and she experienced the invasion. It is a town where I was born. It is called Trostenets. First slide, please.
In a moment. Thank you, Sergey. I just want to give you a moment to have a breath and maybe a sip of water if you have water.
I have no water. I have lemonade.
Okay, cheers. It was 47 years since we were together on stage, and you haven't changed a bit. I'm sure our audience appreciated your humor, and your English is perfect. You sound a little bit from 100 years ago. It really sounds like
Victoria and
reports.
Capuchan.
Yeah, reports from the First World War, I'm afraid. But we really appreciate this as a very precious, invaluable contribution. I'm sure the audience is moved tremendously. We will leave questions for the later, but now I will share the screen and show the slides which Sergey asked me to show. And this is about his native city of Trostenets. I will share my screen now, and Sergey will tell me if he can see my screen. Yes? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, please proceed.
Does everybody see?
Yeah, I hope they do. If you do, everyone does.
Here you see the flag of Trostenets and the question that emerges immediately if you know a little about the geography of Ukraine. Which Trostenets? There are at least 20 settlements with such name. Next slide, please. Yes, this. No. Return to the second.
Okay, here.
Yes. You can see some of them on this map. My native town is marked with an additional blue ribbon around it. Oh, yes, thank you. So let's learn more about it. Next slide, please. Trostenets is situated in a historical region known as Slobozhanщина, or Sloboda, Ukraine. The term Sloboda is related to the Ukrainian word Svoboda, which means freedom, and was used for settlements in the territories free of feudal or church possession. Such territories lay in the northeastern part of modern Ukrainian territory and were populated by refugees from troubled parts of the country. This was in the 17th century or later. Maybe the name of my town is connected with people who came from some other Trostenets that is situated in a more western region, maybe near Vinnytsia or Lviv or Ternopil. There are such. It should be pointed out that some people from the north, that is from Muscovy, also came to the Sloboda Ukraine region. This was one of the sources of mixed population there, although most part of Muscovites came later as members of Russian garrisons. Apart from these, Sloboda Ukraine was organized as a militarized community. It was divided into regiments, each one headed by a colonel. The regiments were further divided into hundreds as military units. A total population of such hundreds was much greater than 100 people. Note that although Sloboda Ukraine was a part of Russian Empire, or then Russian Tsardom, its people were not serfs. Partial enslavement occurred in the 1730s or even later. On this map, you see Sloboda Ukraine combined with the modern borders. White lines mark the borders. Thick white lines mark the borders between modern Russia and modern Ukraine. Thin white lines, the borders between modern regions, oblasts of Ukraine. Solid red lines mark the general borders of Sloboda Ukraine. Dashed red lines are borders between 5 regiments, from west to east. The Sumy region, the Sumy regiment, between 5 regiments. It's a mistake. Borders between 5 regiments are marked with dashed lines. The Sumy regiment in the west, the Akhtirka regiment, the Kharkiv regiment, the Izum regiment, and the Ostrogorsk regiment. One can see that vast territories of former Sloboda Ukraine are now under the jurisdiction of Russia. On the map, Trostenets is marked with a little red circle. It was situated in the territory of the Akhtirka regiment. Let's look now more closely at this terrain. Next slide, please. 4. Victor, number 4. Oh, yes. On the left, you see the part of Sloboda Ukraine map, namely the Sumy Regiment and the Akhtirka Regiment. Trestenets is so small that it is not even marked, so I inserted a little red circle in its place. In old times, it was not a center of 100. Moreover, it was not a town at all. Until 1940, it was just a village. On the right, you see the modern satellite map from Google. Trestenets being on the route between Sumy and Akhtirka. Sumy, Akhtirka, yes. The map partly explains why the Russian invaders fought for this town so fiercely from late February to late March. Though it has no Ukrainian garrison in it, and never had. Position of Trestenets gives an opportunity to fire in the direction of Ukrainian garrisons situated in Akhtirka and Lebedin in the eastern part of the map. After that, they could try to blockade Sumy, which they also fiercely attacked from the north. Trestenets is situated in the forest steppe zone, a mixed landscape, so to say. Those who like steppes, the famous Ukrainian dry grasslands, need to go some 50 miles to the west, where they have a remarkable Michael's Virgin Land Nature Reserve. Steppes near Trestenets are not so outstanding. On the other hand, nearby forests deserve attention. The closest are two with almost synonymous names. The Versailles Forest, which means joyous, merry, and the Neskuchne, meaning non-boring or non-dull. Previous slide, please. Previous slide, please. Yes, thank you. The Versailles Forest lies to the west of the town. It is largely a pine forest, and some villages lie on the outskirts of it. In general, it is more inhabited than Neskuchne. From the porch of the house where I lived in my childhood, one could see the butter plant on the edge of the wood. There is a photograph of a house in Versailles in the upper right of the slide. It was taken in early 20th century. Next slide, please. On the contrary, the Neskuchne forest lies to the east and southeast of the town, and is a little more intact, although its landscape is somewhat artificial. It is famous by its lakes, or rather ponds. Exotic kind of trees may be met here. On the bottom right, you see a high trunk of an American hickory with a decent crown above. Such foreign plants appeared here due to the work of a local forestry research station. Next slide, please. The former view of this forestry station may be seen in the next slide on the left. I say former because in March this building was seriously damaged. This can be seen on the right. The station was founded in 1923. It housed the results of almost a century of research. After the occupation and senseless fire from Russian tanks, all the archives, valuable collections, and vast library of the station burnt to ashes. Next slide, please. This is me as a child in the Neskuchne forest. All the three photos date back to 1956. As entire Ukraine, Trestenets experienced war last time 80 years ago. In the time of my childhood, in the 50s and even in the early 60s, we, the boys, saw trenches in Neskuchne, remains of the World War II, partly leveled by time. We even believed that the dome of the Grotto in Neskuchne was destroyed by the bombs of the German air forces. This assumption was rather silly. There was no reason to bomb a small isolated object of no military value far in the thicket of backwoods. But first I should say something about this historic grotto. Next slide, please. The Grotto of the Nymphs, yes. It was erected in 1809 by an owner of Trestenets village, an heir of the well-known priest Timothy Nadarzyński, a personal confessor of Peter the Great. At that time, the natural forest of Neskuchne was being converted into a park in English style. New exotic sorts of trees were planted, ponds were regulated, relief of the place partly changed, but the only new construction was this grotto. On the photo you see how it looked at the beginning of the 20th century. It was 100 years and more at that time. It is commonly thought that the grotto was dedicated to the 100th anniversary of victory of the Battle of Poltava, where Tsar Peter the Great defeated Swedish King Karl XII and Ukrainian hetman Ivan Mazepa. In contrast with this belief are the vague historical evidences of performances in the grotto, where actresses were dressed, or rather undressed, as nymphs and sylphs, hence the name, the Grotto of the Nymphs. Others say that secret Freemason rituals were held there. Some insist that this was a place of a monstrous depravity and debauchery. And the crown of absurdity is the opinion that it is a terminal of underground passages, dungeons, and tunnels that lead to some secret places, to a cloister in Achtyrka, God only knows where. However it may be, the real historic meaning of the grotto is not quite clear, but its value as a place for sightseeing is high in Trestenets, despite a difficult road. For no transport can bring you there. Even a bicycle is doubtful on the narrow paths along the shore, where distance between a pond and a thick forest may not exceed 1 foot. Next slide, please. Next one. Oh, yeah. As I've said before, the grotto was damaged in the 1940s. The modern way may be seen on this slide, but one cannot recognize the damage. The next photo is of very poor quality, but it makes damage more clear. Oh, you see. My picture on the left was taken in 1975. Here I climbed onto the wall of the grotto and stood on the edge of a big hole in its roof, or rather dome. And my cousin made a photo from inside the grotto. Signs of war were seen 65 or 50 years ago in Trestenets. They were not numerous. Trenches in Neskuchne, where I told before. The grotto partly ruined. I lived near the ruined buildings of the distillery plant. My grandfather was the bookkeeper of this plant. 2 minutes ago, I've talked about the edge of Versailles Forest, seen from the porch of the house I lived in. There was a grave of a Red Army soldier on a little hill near this edge. You can see the hill on the right. He was killed in action there in 1943. Witnesses said that he cried terribly loud at the moment of death. In early childhood, I was scared by this grave and avoided looking there from our porch. But in the late 50s, the grave was moved to the local cemetery, where there was a mass grave of other soldiers, and the hill was empty. And this was almost all that reminds of the period of 1941 to 1943, when Trostenets was occupied by the Wehrmacht. Quite different are the circumstances now. Next slide, please. 12. Here are some pictures of damage and destruction in the town, but this will be considered later in some details, because first of all, I have to tell you about the town itself. Next slide, please. Here are the main dates in the history of Trostenets are presented. The village was founded in 1652 or a little later. The exact date is not clear. Of course, a church was built almost at the same time, but it was wooden and did not preserve. The construction of the first brickwork church began in 1744, and this Annunciation church still exists. You can see it on the right. Below is the famous round yard, a unique building for all Eastern Ukraine. Its emergence is connected with an out-of-the-way phenomenon of Russian serfdom, the serf theater. Great landowners had in their possession not only peasants, craftsmen, and servants, but artists and actors as well. Among the serf artists, one can find Vasily Tropinin, a Russian painter, Mikhail Shchepkin, a Ukrainian actor, Stepan Degtяревsky, a Ukrainian and Russian composer, church composer for the most part, but not only. Andrei Voronikhin, a Russian architect. In the last half of the 18th century, serf theaters came into vogue among the Russian aristocracy. Something like this, the brothers Nadrzhinskys arranged in their estate, but probably is what not a theater but a circus. There is no reliable evidence of what kind of performances were held there. The serf actors lived in the cells, in the towers, and in the thick elliptical walls. It is noteworthy that the inner space of the round yard has a very fine acoustics. The seats for spectators were along the walls, and the action took place in the middle. Next slide, please. In the Soviet time, the building was used as a storehouse. In the time of independent Ukraine, concerts and historical games are held here. A reenactment of night tournaments, pictures above. Quite another historical game was played nowadays. The round yard is rather strong, it cannot be damaged easily. But Russian shell splinters injured the outer surface of its walls. It is represented on the right picture below. The invaders broke its gate also. Below on the left is the destroying of a Russian self-propelled gun that tried to hide near the historical walls. But the Ukrainian drone gave a precise hit on it. Next slide, please. Trostenets in its early history was unique in that respect that being a village, a rural village, not town, it had rather developed industry. As long ago as in the first half of the 18th century, there was a number of enterprises here, namely a mill, smithies, 2 distilleries, an oil mill, a brickyard, and a saltpeter factory. Later on, a malt house emerged. All of these were small plants, but in 1832, a copper works was founded. In 1846, a new distillery, a brewery, and a weaving factory. At last, 1847 is the year when beet sugar factory began to work. This enterprise was the biggest and the most important for Trostenets. New great buildings of this factory were erected in the 1880s. Their photo is on the left. The factory worked for a century and a half. In the 1970s, a chocolate factory emerged near the said sugar factory. It was the greatest in Ukraine and the only one with the full production cycle. The picture of it is on the left bottom. Russian invaders robbed the chocolate factory and ruined it. The remnants are on the photo on the right bottom. Next slide, please. As I said before, first school appeared in Trostenets in the early 18th century, but it was a church school. First secular school was established in 1876. It still functions, and the modern view of it is seen on the slide above. There is a memorial plaque dedicated to the famous Ukrainian author Mykola Khvylovy near the entrance to the school. His father was the head of the school. Their family lived in the same building. The plaque is rather new because the works by Khvylovy were banned for half a century after he committed suicide as a protest against repressions. Note that Khvylovy was his pen name. The true name of his father was Fitilov. Take into account. My grandfather, Anthony Bondarenko, my mother's father, studied in this school. Next slide, please. In 1905, when he graduated, he received a gift from the school for his successes. It was a huge volume of works by Gogol. On the left is the title page of the book, printed in 1902. On the right is a fly-leaf with an inscription signed by all the teachers. The first signature reads Grigory Fitilov. Maybe somebody will manage to read this. Next slide, please. This is a photo taken in the beginning of the 20th century. The same school with pupils before it. Maybe there is my grandpa or Mykola Fitilov among those tiny figures. Who knows? Next slide, please. In 1877, a railroad was built in Trostenets. However, the name of the station was not Trostenets, but Smorodina, after the nearby village. This was made due to the existence of many settlements of the same name. I told of them at the beginning of this historical narrative. I remember the old building of this railway station, painted brown, one story, with a bronze bell to ring at the arriving or departure of trains. Next slide, please. In 1982, a new building was constructed. Quite new. Next slide, please. The square before the station was decorated with a monument, an authentic Soviet tank from the times of the World War II. It was erected as a memory of the liberation of the town from the Nazi troops in 1943. Everything around the square and in the vicinity was damaged or ruined by the Russians in March 2022. You may compare these two photos. The building of the railway station is the same. All the rest is different. Next slide, please. An apartment block opposite the station underwent shooting by the direct fire from the Russian tanks. I will not comment this, you see the destruction. And The next and the final for today slide. Number 23, please. When the invaders were leaving the town, they took under the fire the local hospital. This firing was even more perfidious because Russian soldiers themselves earlier went to this hospital and got medical aid there from the Ukrainian doctors. I didn't give you the whole history of my town. I didn't tell about visit of great composer Tchaikovsky to Trestenets. Didn't show you the monument of him, the villa where he lived, the museum in this villa, modern museum, that was also robbed and ruined. It took too much time, I see. So let's make the end here. And if you are interested in the history of my little town, we may return to it later. Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. We all are extremely impressed. I know there are questions. If you can stay for us for a few minutes, I know.
Yes, I do.
Soon, but Katerina writes, thank you for sharing the story of your hometown. It makes the suffering of the Ukrainian people so much more immediate for those of us in the West and across the whole globe. We we thank you for telling us all this personal and super personal information and sharing with us. It's completely invaluable in our understanding, and I hope this will be watched by many. Please, questions. I know there are some.
I have a question. Thank you very much for your amazing presentation. I hope you can publish book or circulate more this information. And I have, you're an expert in this area. And my question, how to rebuild your city and Ukraine in general? What are priorities, rebuilding priorities? Do people discuss now at the grassroots level what should be done first and what should be done second? So that's a very important question, how to prioritize the rebuilding process. Thank you.
It's really a very important question, and I think nobody knows the answer in general, because the war still goes on. And we don't know, the invaders may return to Kiev region, maybe to Sumy region also. But what I know about Trestenets itself, that the head of its community, the world is mayor. Victor, tell me.
Mayor is correct.
Mayor. Yes, I've forgotten the word. He had a talk with some Austrian architects who already make a plan for restoring Trestenets, for restoration of its historical buildings. And you've seen some of them are unprecedented, at least in eastern Ukraine. And I think that this will be made. And it is making.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that it's an important question because look at Germany paid the last reparation for the World War II in October 2010. So that's why it's very important to, I think that people, local people, participate and discuss what they should do first for their homeland, for their home cities. So, and it begins in the actual during the war. Usually, peace building, peacemaking, and then peace building are discussed during conflict. Thank you.
I may add a couple of words. A shell. Well, near the gate of my aunt's house, and when the town was liberated, and I have to say that we had for 3 weeks no communication with her because there was no electricity. They couldn't, well, the phones were out of charge. So she phoned when the town was liberated to the well, sapere minori.
Sappers and miners.
Sappers.
Sappers and miners.
Well, she phoned to sappers, and they were very busy because the whole town was mined. Moreover, the cemetery was mined. I don't know why. And they said that they will come to her house later, and that she let her be careful. And then they came and say that this shell is it exploded yet, and it is safe for people. So you see that the problems of people are too close to their, how to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
I doubt.
I'm a little tired of such a long talk.
I know, and we will let you go. One final question, if anyone has, please prepare. And I need to tell to everyone who is watching that from everyone's perspective, the government that mines other countries' cemeteries will have a long way to explain this to the world when it is over at the trial. Thank you. Any more questions, please? And if we don't, I will let Sergey go. Thank you, my friend, and we hope your evening and night goes well. This was Sergey Hamashan from Kiev, Ukraine, where air raids go on and off.
I have a question to the audience.
Please.
Is the history of my town, the long ago history and modern history, so interesting that the audience will prefer to hear more about it? Or
I speak for the audience and I say yes, because it would be very interesting to see this type of raw data, the information, not even for students of history department of any university, but for everyone. Imagine that we had recordings like this from ancient Rome, we're watching history live, and we're part of it right now. Thank you so much, and God bless America. God bless Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Glory to
Героям
Ukraine.
слава!
Героям Slava. Thank you, and I will ask, stay with us for a moment. I will ask Katerina to say greetings and blessing to our friends in Ukraine.
Дорогенькі брата і сестри в Україні, ви в наших денних думках і молитвах. Ви приклад цілому світі сили і волі, мужності і вірі. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня, як козаки колись казали, бувайте здорові і Богові милі. Прощаюся, па-па.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes our August 5th session of Ukraine discussion group, Marshall University, West Virginia. Please watch our announcements and come back next week and all weeks. We are not stopping. Thank you very much. This is the end of recording.